live. Or as Prince would say, let's go crazy. Let's see here.
By the way, while he's doing that, how do I change my settings here? I see that I'm the oddball here, the only one who has just my first name here, and so I feel out of place.
Oh, I can change that for you, but there's a menu right there. Let me share this to wherever it needs to be shared.
There's 3 dots at the top right of your little
screen.
box.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You can click those and then click rename.
Very good, Nick. Tech
Thank you.
support.
I've been in Zoom all day, so I would hope I have it down by now. But I don't think I completely do.
Okay. Almost done, guys. And then I will press record and we'll be on it. But there's people watching us probably right now because we are on YouTube and a couple of Facebook pages. And Wayne, you want it on your personal page, right?
That's okay. I got the link.
You got it?
Yeah, I just grabbed it from where you put it, so no problem.
Okay, Arnita, I'm putting it on yours.
Oh.
What in the world was? I mean, oh my gosh.
Now, I don't see these 3 dots here.
Put your cursor, just roll your cursor over your screen, over your little box. Put your cursor over that box and 3 dots should show up in the right in a blue. It's not happening?
Here, I can get you. I'll get you.
Okay.
I've got the ability.
To make anybody anything.
I do. It's L-Y, right? Not L-E-Y?
L-E-Y.
It is L-E-Y. Okay. There you are. You're in the zone now. All right, we're going to press record and then Wayne, off to you.
All righty.
We're in.
Okay, I want to welcome you to our next session of the Language of Healing Live. Today with us is a number of folks that you'll meet throughout the podcast. Today, Vince Coakley is going to be our host today. He's the host of the Vince Coakley Show, appropriately named, I guess, out of Charlotte, North Carolina on WBT, also broadcast on 106.3 Word in Greensville, South Carolina. Wow, that's a lot of stuff to remember. In any case, Vince, he's also a former congressional candidate, a good friend of mine. Vince Coakley will be our moderator today. Welcome, Vince, and thanks for doing this.
Hey, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I absolutely salute all 3 of you guys for doing such a wonderful job. It was kind of interesting because I do a radio talk show. We talk about current events, about politics, and especially in recent months, I've been really burdened about the incivility that has been in the atmosphere. So when I heard from Wayne, he told me, hey, we've got this book project that we're working on. I was very gratified. I felt it was very timely. And so having a conversation about this today is certainly a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. I know for me, as I start off talking about this, guys, one of the things that's been on my heart is, especially watching recent events that have been in the news, I've been really burdened about how we've allowed ourselves to, as Christians, to get drawn into other people's narratives, rather than representing the kingdom and representing a genuine expression of Christ in the community. That's been a real burden of mine. And that's really one of the places I wanted to start with you, Wayne. How do we change the conversation and avoid getting drawn into the promotion of false and divisive binary choices? Because everybody's trying to get us into their camp. How do we do that, Wayne?
They are, and it's not easy. It depends on where you're having these conversations. Obviously, our book was written so that people, one conversation at a time, one person at a time, can help change the conversation in the world. We can't do much about the conversation in the media. We can't do much about the conversation in the advocacy groups on various sides, because all that is very binary. It always paints the opposing person in the most extreme terms and themselves in the most reasonable terms. And as you've said, it makes people incredibly angry. So even when we get into this discussion with friends and family, people are already choosing a side. And if you're not fully on my side, you're on the other side. I've been called a liberal and a progressive by my conservative friends just because I'm going, look, I disagree with you there. I think you're a little misinformed, and they kind of freak out. So how we change the conversation, one, stay gentle. That helps. You can be honest, you can be forthright, but if you join the anger, then it just keeps ramping up because people try to trump reason with emotion always. So I'd say, tone it down a little bit, ask questions more than try to push your objective on people. So have people really probe what they're saying, or if they say something, do you really think most people feel that way? I do that all the time, whether it's progressives or conservatives. I'll say, do you really think all conservatives think like that? And they'll go, well, they don't. I go, no, they don't, because I'm conservative and I don't think that way. And then you can get more into a conversation when you kind of get them to rethink, this may not be so binary as I have been led to believe it is. And I don't need to choose a side and be against another side, that I can actually be a voice that, more like you said, promotes the mission of Christ in the world, which is not about choosing sides and getting our way. It's about how to live generously in a culture that doesn't always agree about stuff. And I think we have a capacity to do that if we just don't get caught up in the whole binary thinking and look at issues as a much broader construct than this very narrow, I've got to be on this side or that side.
Something I really love that you said there, Wayne, is about conversations between individuals, because I think this is a lot of where this goes down the drain, is it loses sight of, we're trying to, a lot of people get in this mode, we want to change something big, but the way to change something big is by relating to individuals and having healthy relationships with them. It's got to be a one person at a time. We can't fire hose this thing. That's just not going to work.
And the temptation election year definitely it's very binary. It's that guy or that guy, right? So everything is going to move that way. And for us to move beyond it, outside of it, have different conversations is critically important, especially this year.
Very much so. Very much so.
Hey, Vince, can I jump in?
Please do.
Because I think it's interesting. I think as human beings, we are wired to think with nuance. We're wired to have more than one thought in our head. But when the loudest voices in our ears are those telling us it's either or, you either do this or this is going to happen, then it becomes almost automatic that we begin to think binary. It becomes something that happens because it's what we're told to do. I watched today and I love my congressman. His name's Kevin McCarthy. He's a really good guy. But he oftentimes carries the water a little bit for his party.
You think?
Well, a little bit. And I know he's a good man, but he has a tendency to put these choices of A or B, and there's nothing in between. When in reality, it might be A to Z, and there's all these letters that are in between. And at the root of all that is fear. At the root of all of it. If I don't do this, then this is going to happen because that's what my leaders said. So we're at a strange place in our history. I mean, it's not the first time we've been here, but we are in a strange place.
Yeah, no doubt about that at all. And one of the things that's so important in all of this conversation is it's one thing to talk about ideas, but it's also important that we maintain our character in the midst of all of this. Arnita, you addressed something that was so important about preserving our sense of decency, fairness, and compassion. In many ways, we seem to have lost this. How do we get that back, Arnita?
Well, first of all, I'll say it's really not a plural thing. You got to get it back one person at a time. I don't presume that everybody wants it back. Some people are very happy to be the way they are. But if we're going to have any type of positive direction, positive outcome with all the things that we're so polarized around, we're going to have to just try and find some type of plumb line for fairness and decency. But of course, you have to want to do that. You have to put work in to do that. And you just have to be reasonable in your thinking about that. You know, the binary thinking thing is hard for me. I'm a scientist. We're taught to question everything and analytically think. And so what I realize is a lot of people are not and cannot. And so it becomes a little bit harder. But, you know, we got to decide if you want to be decent. I can't make you decent, Vince, and you can't make me decent. So it's really an individual decision. But I think if we are going to be Christ followers, we have someone who has set a great standard there for us.
Yeah, no question.
And those things have to be more important than clicks or likes.
Yeah.
If you're chasing that, conflict is what makes that work. If you're chasing decency and compassion and integrity, then you're not going after clicks. You're going after a better conversation.
Amen to that. Amen to that. And this kind of connects into something that is so difficult, because this issue of leaders versus followers, because I tend to be a person, you know, maybe it's just the gifting in me, but one of my passions is to see people come into a place of sovereignty and exercising leadership, whatever their sphere is. And so I kind of abhor when I watch people run after people, and they run after them and they seem to kind of throw their minds out, and whatever that person says, that's what we follow. That I just abhor that kind of mindset. So, Bob, how do we get beyond? Is it reasonable to expect that people are going to be willing to move beyond being passive? Because you talk about the fact that being a peacemaker means you have to be active. You can't just sit back. You got to jump in, and you got to actively pursue peacemaking.
Yeah, you do. It's an action word at its core, and in its totality, peacemaking is messy. It just is. We can't get there by always, you know, listening to the loudest voices or rolling over or being a bully or whatever the case may be. It requires work and action. I mean, it's just like if I were a cabinet maker, I'm in the business of making cabinets. So I'm in the business of making peace. That's the way I view it. And yeah, of course I hold out hope, Vince. I always hold out hope. I always believe that there's better days ahead. And I'm just one of those guys who is, you know, maybe I'm foolish to believe it, but that not everything is written in stone, and you know, here comes hell in a handbasket, you know, all the stuff. I believe we can really see change. So, but it does start with that understanding that, you know, we're not. You think of the peaceful guy, and you're thinking of you know, the guy in the corner that never says anything. That nothing could be further from the truth. It's active. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's loud. I mean, I'm seeing the Black Lives Matter movement right now as peacemaking. That's my own personal. I think they're trying to find a place where they can live peacefully on this earth and in this country. And so I don't have a problem separating those two. It's just how I view. I'd love to hear what everybody else has to think, by the way, on some of this.
Okay, I mean, for that matter, I mean, this might be good, but let's come back to that one, because I want to, you know, get some thoughts about this. And we were talking about followers and leading and that sort of thing, because this also gets into groupthink, because a lot of times people end up kind of following along what becomes the new fad. This is the new thing that we're pursuing, and everybody's got to jump on board, and everybody, it's almost like people have to park their minds and follow along with whatever the script is of the day. How do we avoid that, Arnita? Because I know that you talked about having the scientific mind, so you're going to analyze things. I know you're not going to just follow along. Have you always been this way, analytical?
Well, I'll be real honest with you, Vince. I think that eliminating or really making groupthink smaller, I think is very personality driven. I think there's some personalities who are going to lead to do that. a lot easier than some, and that just comes out of some studying that I've done before. But in general, if you are cognizant of the fact that you are responsible for your actions alone, you are to be accountable to your actions alone. At some point, uh, it just behooves you to challenge groupthink in your life. Now, I do understand how social power, and that's adult peer pressure, plays into that. But at the end of the day, you have to make your own decisions and follow the consequences of your own decisions. And that absolutely just nullifies a whole bunch of groupthink bias, which is uncomfortable for people. They want to be with the crowd. They want to go with the flow. But as you mentioned it in the context of leadership, leaders always go against the flow. We don't have a problem saying, "Well, I see how y'all feel that way. I don't," and we'll say it very emphatically. So, lot of moving parts there for sure.
There certainly are, and you guys mentioned earlier, just we're at a place where what seems to grab the attention, what seems to get clicks, is the negativity and the animosity that's stirred up. And I've gotten to the place. I'll just tell you, for one, I want to be very clear. I've tried to address this in myself and make sure that there's not animosity being put out there in the circulation on social media, wherever else, on the radio. The other thing is I've started doing is I've just tried to gently question people. I hope you'll indulge me in telling a brief story. And I want to be very clear about where I am. I tell people all the time, I am neither a never Trumper, nor am I an always Trumper. That's the position that I take. Well, I have a situation where someone I worked with posted, "If you're a Trump supporter, please go ahead and unfriend me now." So I found myself kind of sending out messages, private messages to people like this. And what I did is I asked this person, "Do you really want to behave like that? Because does this not make you what you're opposed to?" So what ended up happening is we started exchanging messages for like 10 minutes. And one of my pet peeves is when people write books in private messages. I'm like, okay, this time I just need to call. So I call over Messenger. Would you believe this guy I've never talked to before? We've just recognized each other from work. We had a 1-hour conversation. And by the end, he was asking me questions about some things. And mainly, and I just bring this up because this atmosphere we have is so toxic. Bob, this language of animosity, how do we begin uprooting this toxicity?
Well, first of all, we have to examine why it's here. And I think that the 24-hour news cycle has not helped. The fact that we have for-profit news rather than nonprofit. So we've got news organizations that run to their own corners, and their business is to spread animosity and to make us not trust one another, because that's what keeps us tuning in. I remember when I do this podcast called A Christian and Muslim Walk Into a Studio, and we had Wayne on one time, and we went out to dinner afterwards at a restaurant, and he said something that struck both my partner Ahmad and me. He said, "Guys," he said, "you realize the way forward for you is not going to make any money. The fact that you are trying to find a common language." He said, "If you guys argued and got angry at each other," he said, "you guys could probably be rich." But he was like, saying, "Way to go, guys. Way to keep your eye on the ball a little bit." So for me, proximity does away with animosity. Empathy does away with animosity. When I can put myself in somebody else's shoes, when I can spend time with someone who's not like me, and feel their pain a little bit or feel their joy, it's very difficult to have that animus.
I'd love to hear from Nick on that.
Yeah,
I'd love to hear from that person doing all that great study on that question.
Oh, goodness.
I
So
would.
one of the things that I actually just started doing a couple weeks ago was leading some workshops with Preemptive Love Coalition and they're called the Love Anyway workshops. And the first week we talk about listening and the power of listening. And to kind of go along with what Bob was saying there, just when we listen to people, what is the posture of our listening? Are we, if we imagine ourselves at a table with somebody, are we sitting there with our arms folded and our legs crossed, or are we sitting there with our mind open, our arms open, ready to hear what they have to say? And as he mentioned, empathy and stories are just such a big part of who we are. I have come to believe that, and I'm always willing to be wrong, I've come to believe that you really can't demonize or dehumanize someone when you've heard their story. Like, it's really hard to do. Because in their story, you hear their fears, you hear their brokenness, and you hear their passions.
Good.
That's really good. I'm one of those guys that believes that stories can save the world. I mean, I honestly do. And even if Jesus becomes the point of the focal point for us of what we look at as an example, he was a guy that basically walked around, and when he encountered regular people, he told stories. There once was a man. I mean, oh my gosh. So I'm that guy that says, yes, stories can save us.
Just another
Absolutely
thing
agree.
to,
Yes.
I'm sorry. I was
Go
just
right ahead.
thinking, thank you. Today I was having a conversation with a group of friends. So as a person of color, I've been living in the South for most of my life now, over 30 years, and originally from New York City, a very diverse place. But I now live in an area where you kind of end up having to choose between you live in a Black neighborhood or you live in a white neighborhood. So just by the house that we like, we live in a white neighborhood. We happen to, mostly have white neighborhoods, not neighbors and whatnot, and even our sort of Christian community. And so that just happens to be what my circles are. So anyway, I have been challenged by one of my friends who basically said, a couple of years ago when I was having, a friend and I were hosting a race discussion group about sharing my story and sharing some of the injustices that I've experienced, that my family has experienced, that my friends have experienced, that I don't ever share. And the reason why I didn't share is because I know I have tried that before in these circles, and it often gets dismissed as, oh, that's not racial, or, that doesn't happen that often. And those kind of comments basically made me shut down. And so that is very painful, and it has taken some growth, but she still challenged me, and I have been walking that out. And I would say I've grown in the area of sharing, and now I'm in the midst of a conversation with a group of friends that, several different pockets of friends that I just reached out to, and I said, I need you. Like, we need each other. I can't do this by myself. I need to be able to share my story and share my pain. And would you be willing to listen? And that opened up this conversation that we have been in now for a couple of weeks. And it's been so beautiful, and it's super messy. And there's been some hard things that we have talked about. And there's been moments where we've taken a few days of a break. But at the end of it, we keep coming back because we love each other. We've already built these relationships. We've been friends for over 5 years. Everybody in this group, probably more like 7 or 8. And so it's a safe space. And but it was a difficult challenge to get over. One of the other things I just wanted to mention in terms of the toxicity piece is just like, I have been just really focused on when I see somebody explode in anger or whatever these sort of big emotion things that come out, whether it's through the Black Lives Matter movement or anything else, I always think about what is it underneath all of that they're feeling that's causing them to react in this way. And so again, trying to, what Nick was saying, bring it down to their humanity is really important, and seeing through the strong emotion into what's causing that.
I love, Vanessa, that you could ask somebody, tell somebody, this is what I need from you. I need you to listen. I don't need you to argue with me. I think that's perfect, because that opens the door to a more meaningful conversation. I think what we want to make clear in the language of healing is not, oh, that we're all going to sit around and sing Kumbaya together. To me, the heart of the language of healing is we're creating a safe space for disagreements to exist. We don't have to agree to like each other. We don't have to agree to care about each other. And I think somehow the media's and politics has put us in this environment that agreement is everything. And so if you don't agree with me, I'm going to toss you over here and I'm going to find people who are my tribe. And I think this reverses that. And it says, no, I want to create safe spaces so people around me can be honest with me. Because when I'm talking, I'm not learning anything. I already know what I know. I don't know what you folks know. And so it's real important to me in those conversations to not worry about agreement, just worry about, do we have a safe place here for you to be honest? Because if we do, we'll learn something. And if we don't have that, then we're just going to stay tribal.
One of the things I really appreciate learning, a good friend of mine, Dr. Steve Crosby, made a point, and this is probably one of the most profound things that changed the way I go about really whatever I do. He talked about the fact that when Jesus came, the first thing that he did was not to preach, not to perform a miracle, or do a long teaching. But the first thing he did was he became a man. So the first thing he did was an act of identification. And I think this is where so much of where we are goes astray, because we want to go immediately into conversation. We want to go into issues. We want to go into problems. But really, the first thing we need to do with another human being is identify with them as a human being. And the starting place, a good part of the time, is to listen. Like when I mentioned this person I communicated with from that Facebook communication, and this ties in with what you said, Bob, about stories, listening to stories, how important, because as I heard him share the story of 8 times being pulled over by police, and several of those times he was actually, his car was searched and he was patted down. So immediately I'm hearing this story and I'm thinking, wow, that's quite a story. I ended up having him on my show, by the way, a couple of days later to share his story, because part of what I think we miss, again, is the empathy of the human story, and it gets lost in issues. And what we need to do is hear people's hearts. I think you guys would all agree with that, right? Hearing not just their words, but their hearts.
Joshua, the other people in the room, I want to hear your voice. There's other people here. Nancy, Leah.
I'll take it because we've been recording. I'm a podcaster, and we recorded this past Sunday. Part 3 and part 4 of our being born Black in America, and it was funny because we recorded the first time. It was just me and my wife, and we were talking, and we were, I would say, kind of angry. And there was a lot of emotion built up because my wife is African American and she's experienced a lot of racism in front of me, in front of our kids, constantly. It's just something we deal with on a daily basis. And so in the podcast, we were recording and with motion, and I went to go edit and the audio was gone. A whole hour's worth of audio gone. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I was frustrated. And I said, okay, we gotta sit down and record this again. So what was cool about it is that this time as we recorded, I thought it was better. We got the emotion out, and now we really got to express. We really got to, talk more and more clearly and more passionately about what was on our heart. And I think sometimes what we need is to listen more and allow people that chance, that safe space just to blow out, whatever it may be. And that will allow us then to be able to really channel and talk and drive a conversation, because somebody might be so passionate about something that the emotions are just flowing out and they're not thinking straight. And I'm sitting in my city right now in Richmond, and man, it is going bonkers right now here. And you're starting to have a tit for tat now going on in our city over the monuments. And there's a lot of emotion rising. And I don't think as a community, we have created a space where we can allow somebody just to express what's going on and then be able to have a conversation. And that, it was crazy. I was like, thank you, God, for erasing that podcast because, to be honest, I mean, it was, my wife would say, lower your voice, and you're gonna wake the kids. I'm like, I feel so passionate about this, and it was good though because it got out, and then it got better the second time. So,
David, go. You had something.
Yeah, I think that creating a safe space definitely involves listening, but I also find that creating a safe space, it's like Vanessa was saying, it involves me having the courage to tell my story. I think that peacemakers oftentimes make peace by putting our pain on display and talking about our experience. I'm an Asian American with a PhD, pastoring in the heart of blue collar California. I should be in another city, but Asians tend to. There's some negative stereotypes, but we have a lot of positive stereotypes. Hardworking, good at math, don't complain a lot. But even those positive stereotypes that don't create injustice, it creates a lack of intimacy because people think they know me, but they really don't. And so until I tell my story of what I experienced as constantly being aware that I don't fit in a white Hispanic community, I can't really make peace. I can be that passive moderator between two other people's conversation, but I think pain on display is something we have to find the courage to do. And as followers of Christ, of course, the central narrative is the Jesus story. Right. And I think of Ephesians 2, the great chapter on racial reconciliation. We love the things about, he broke down the wall of division. He's made the two one. There's a brand new humanity that's there. But Jesus did so, the Jesus story, not by only listening, but through his body on the cross. And I think that there is something about dying that authorizes us to be peacemakers. And some of that dying could be a dying of my own pride, of not wanting people to know my pain, my emotions, my own racial bias at times. And some of that dying could be that, blessed are the peacemakers because both sides will hate them, but are we willing to die and put our pain on display, have those honest conversations back to actually create that type of Christ created peace that actually does make a brand new humanity for us?
That's very, very good stuff here. I wanted to, along those lines, I thought it would be a good subject to go into, Arnita, because I think we have something in common. You share in your book about going into a white church for the first time, and kind of a theme and connection I'm getting at here is the idea of putting ourselves in uncomfortable situations, because the tendency is we want to be around people who are going to affirm us, or they're going to be like us. They're going to think like us. They're going to talk like us. They're going to look like us. And there's a time when the Lord certainly assigns us to be around people that are not like us. Share a little bit about your journey there, Arnita, and how important that was for you.
Well, yeah, it's when I moved to North Texas and was just closer. I live in a white neighborhood pretty much. So I was just to a white church. And so I went, and there's so many levels of discomfort when you do that. The songs are different. Everything's just the whole way the culture is expressed, even though we're in Jesus, things are expressed along a more social line. And it's uncomfortable, but any time that you're going to grow, I don't think that God, not turning this into a God talk, but I don't think he calls us to be comfortable. He
Amen.
calls us to be purposeful and obedient to what he tells us to do. And so probably if you're comfortable, you're probably not walking in the very best thing that he has for you. And that's just been my experience in general. But part of being able to have conversations, and we've talked a lot about emotions. Peacemakers have to be okay with people having emotion. You have to deal with your own level of fragility, for lack of a better word. If you have a teenager that goes crazy, you still love your teenager. You just let them blow it off and you come back later. but we can't be afraid to be uncomfortable with emotion and expression and passion. Some people cry, some people are going to shout, but comfort cannot be a goal when we're talking about healing along polarized minds. If you want to be comfortable, you are probably in the wrong conversations, which is why you have so many people getting their feelings hurt and, oh man, that's disrespectful. But it's only disrespectful because you don't agree with it. Did you really hear what I said? And so it really challenges people's emotional capacity to do some of the things that we're asking them to do, to sit down with people who are different and have some discomfort and to take a licking and keep on ticking and go back in there. So yeah, it was very uncomfortable, but my goodness, I'm so glad that I had the fortitude to push through it, because some of my very best friends and people who loved me unconditionally were in that place. So
Awesome.
It all worked out for me.
And because you've done that, Arnita, this positions you to be even more effective in engaging other people and recognizing their discomfort.
That's very true. Yeah, and I'm pretty outspoken. I kind of call it out pretty hard. So
what?
Look at y'all's faces. They're like, what?
I can attest to that.
So
right here.
I was gonna say, Nancy, you probably should speak to this a little bit.
Unmute. I'm Nancy Routson. I am a former pastor, and now I teach 7th grade English in a mostly Hispanic community in Arlington, Texas. Arnita has been a challenger in my life ever since I met her. And she's not afraid of the questions, and she's not afraid of, and even as I was reading chapter 1 today, I was like, oh, I've learned so much how to do this. And one of the things she has taught me, and I've learned, and I wish I'd learned this when I was pastoring, because we pastored a white evangelical conservative church. And I am not typically conservative nor evangelical. So it was an interesting scenario, but in North Texas, that's what you're going to get. And I tend to be a bit of a bull in a china shop. If I have an opinion, you're going to hear about it. And if there's a leadership vacuum, I will take over. So that doesn't help. That really doesn't help these kinds of conversations. And I've learned so much from Arnita, and I'm learning so much now about even things like recognizing when you see anger, when you see the defensiveness, to step back. And I have to remind myself to step back and say, what is the underlying emotion? What's going on there? And it's usually fear and pain. It's usually there's something they're afraid of. They're afraid of losing position. They're afraid of losing influence. They're afraid of being hurt, or it's pain at what they've experienced. And I do this easily with my students because they're 12 and 13 years old. So I can easily watch them go off the rails and remind, all right, what's hurting? What are you afraid of? What's going on? And I can de-escalate that way, have a little less patience with adults. But this conversation, I have a Facebook book club right now. We started with White Fragility because they're mostly white. So we started, as somebody said, with the pre-work, not the work. And our next book is going to be A Language of Healing, because then the next step is, how do we talk? How do we learn to recognize the pain in ourselves and the fear in ourselves enough to have empathy for others and go, I see that you're afraid. I see that you're upset. How can we get past that? How can I help you? How can I sit with you in that? And then we can start the language of how do we get on the same page? But shout out to Arnita for consistently leading me all these years and being willing to put up with my ignorant questions and my crazy, what now? So.
Oh, my pleasure, friend.
I wanted to follow up something with Arnita briefly. I don't want this to get lost here, because this really struck me out of a number of things I was reading in this chapter. And this is on the subject of respect, because I think so many things we do as Americans, as Westerners, we have a mindset that people have to earn something. You talked about something that I really thought was brilliant, and that is that respect is not something that has to be earned. Tell me your thinking behind why people have to be respected. Everyone.
You know, I see respect as a basic human right. I can think of context. I have a son who plays basketball. So in competitive sports, you're going to earn respect, meaning by your skill set out on that court. But that's not the end all and be all of respect. I really do think respect is a basic human right. If I look at my own life, when I was growing up, I was taught to be respectful. You know, just that was just something we did. It was a common courtesy. And I think where respect gets lost is I can deeply respect your work and what you do and what you bring to the planet, Vince, because God sent you here to do something divine and do good works, even if I don't agree with you. And I think we've gotten caught up into, oh, they can't have my respect because they don't agree with me. And that's like not advantageous for us as humans. I see people who are doing deep work in society. I probably don't want to have coffee with them. But you know what? That's okay. I can have an element of respect for them just on the basis of what they contribute to humanity. So it's probably all caught up in a definition, but there are different levels. Not all respect is created equal, and everybody's trying to earn it. And nobody's earning it because we don't agree enough. And if I don't agree with you, it's just a vicious cycle. We don't win that way.
In a relationship, though, what I think is key about what you've said, though, Arnita, is if you grant that to somebody, you have built a bridge to that person's heart.
Absolutely.
That gives them the opportunity and recognition, wow, this person has created a safe place for me to be me.
Absolutely. And when I can give respect, I can demand it back.
Any other thoughts on this?
Yeah.
Leah, you seem to have be brimming there.
I'm enjoying the conversation so much, and I'm one of those I love to listen to you all. I do think that respect for every human is just going to be vital in moving all of this forward. And you're right, it does not have to be earned. It was granted by God, and so it does not have to be earned. And I think that learning to listen and people aren't going to be honest until they feel that you respect them. They're not going to tell their stories, and they're not going to share their hearts. And so I think that respect is just so crucial. But honestly, just learning to see each person that we come in contact with as created by God and put here in this time and in this place, even if you don't agree with them, but they're a part of this wonderful tapestry that makes our world so beautiful. And when you can respect their opinion, even if it's not yours, but understand that it's enlarging your experience here and it's making the world a better place, when we bring all of the pieces together, the world would not be near as beautiful if we all thought the same. And so the more that I learn from and listen to people who are not at all like me, I become a happier person in general. And I think that I can then lend my voice to this peacemaking process in a better way.
I wonder if it's of value, this is David here, to see respect as a continuum. What you're talking about in terms of unconditional respect, it's definitely true. You can't gain respect unless you give respect.
Absolutely.
So it starts with that baseline. We're all created in the image of God. Every human has value. But the whole idea of covenant in the Bible is that you make to the death agreements based on a history of respect. So the beginning of covenant in the Bible is a preamble that recalls how the relationship has been honorable time and time again. And I think if we're going to be change agents in our community, we have to go beyond the starting point of listening respectfully, et cetera, to then gaining a history that says now we really can trust, now we can really build coalition. Now we can really work together for change. And so definitely it has to start there. As I said, you can't gain it if you don't give it. But I'm not sure it can end there to truly see the level of social change that we want.
And I like to add into that because I think it was important. And I think it's something we had to look at ourselves is, do we see the person in front of us as a human being, or do we see him as a Democrat, Republican, or so on? Do we actually see that person as a human? Yeah, they might not look like me. They might have hair slick as me. They might be like Arnita. They might be. I love the hair, by the way. Yeah, I got some scarves just for my wife. You have too, inspired by that. But do that person I see across from me, do I see them as a human? And when we begin to able to see them as a human, then we be able to start to give respect. And I think sometimes we have to question ourselves and look in the, I like Michael Jackson said, right, the man in the mirror.
Yes.
And just look at the man in the mirror and figure that out. And Bob's probably gonna like this one, Mr. Rogers. When he had, I can't remember the guy's name who played Officer Clemens. That in that documentary, it gets me every time because he never saw Mr. Rogers. He saw him, but didn't see him until that one episode. And when he pulled him backstage and said to him, "Did you really mean when you said that to me that you love me just the way I am?" And he says, "Yes, I've been saying that to you for 2 years." And he says, if you listen to the interview, he goes, "From that day forward, he was my surrogate dad." Because he said his dad never told me he loved him. He said no man in his whole entire life ever said that. He began to see him more as a human. And I think that's what we need to do. So we need to question how I'm acting towards the person in front of me. Do I see them as a human? Because, it's kind of hard when you say give, or to give, to receive respect is to give it. And when I see that person in front of me as a human and I begin to treat them as a human, it's how can you, as a person on the other side, fight against that? It starts to break down your walls. And I wish that we see that more today, especially what we have going on in our country, that we can then be able to talk about this stuff more. We need a conversation. I mean, this stuff is crazy. We have a big problem and we need to deal with it. And knowing how we can deal with it is we begin to talk and have a conversation, admit that we do have a problem and that somebody is hurting and that we need to see that person as a human.
Hey, I'm wondering, I'd love to hear from some folks. Do you think it's possible to have unity without agreement? Anybody want to talk about that? Because most people would define unity as agreement.
But that's uniformity. That's not unity.
Uniformity.
There it is.
Diversity within unity is, in fact, if we want to, I know we don't want to make this a God talk, but that's the kingdom.
It is.
Unity within diversity, and it's the diversity with unity. It's understanding that there's a reason that we have all these beautiful colors and shades and fingerprints, and there's a reason for all of this. And it's because each of us carries an aspect of God. Each of us carries some dimension of his. When you start to study things like the Enneagram and you realize that all of those parts, we're each reflecting a part of God. And so how boring would it be if everybody was like me? That would just be
But
boring.
you have purple hair. You have purple hair. You're not
hair.
boring, chick.
Well, but it would be boring if everybody did, right? It would be boring if everybody thought like me and everybody looked like me and everybody was crazy like me. That would just be boring and chaotic. And so what we all bring to the table, that in fact puts the puzzle pieces together that creates unity. So it's diversity within unity, unity within diversity. We're not after uniformity.
It's pretty good.
Great distinction. Great distinction. We've only got a few minutes left here. I'm wondering whether there's a question or a comment or something that's really burning in somebody's heart here in the final minutes we have left that you just want to put out there. You've got to get this out there before the end of our podcast here.
I want to go back to the theme of the first chapter, which is a fork in the road. Are we going to continue to be a society that looks for agreement, that my side tries to get more power than your side, by we tear you down, we lie about our best stuff, and are we going to continue to do that, or are we going to press for the kinds of things we've talked about here, respect that goes beyond agreement and looking out for my fellow human beings, even though their experience and needs may differ from mine. Even when you get to a thing like respect, I think it's very common in the culture I come from that respect is earned. And so if that kid's coming to apply for a job that's tatted up and runs his shorts a little low on the backside, it's kind of like you don't have respect for that, not realizing it comes from a different culture. So if I'm going to define respect as you meet my cultural norms, then we're going to stay away from the very thing we're talking about. And if we give respect to someone, just their basic humanity gives them respect. And that's not the kind of respect where I'll go into business with you, because I'm with David. When you get to a point of actually working together, I want to make sure that the respect by the integrity of your character. But that's not how you dress, how you act, whether you've got tattoo, purple hair, blowing it up out the hair. It doesn't matter that. Yeah. And I think sometimes when you think of respect as something you give it as the reward for meeting your cultural norms. And we're talking about something so much bigger than that. How do we take even the racial unrest in our country over the last few weeks and actually not polarize into this camp's going to fight off this camp, and we're going to exaggerate the other's position, and we're going to mock it, and we're going to go through all that. How do we really take the best of all worlds? Because I think consensus building is not, look, it's A or B. Or compromise. We're going to get a much of A as we can, have to give in a little B. No, consensus means there's an E out there that is the best of what you want, the best of what I want. If we can work together to find that, where we both walk away from the table going, man, that will work for me. If we can both do that, then I think that's what we hope to set up, with a different way of looking at each other and living more generously in the world. That we're not looking for the answers I want, we're looking for the answers that serve us all well. That's where my heart is.
Amen. Amen.
You know, sometimes it's interesting. I so agree with Wayne, but it's so funny when you're dealing with respect, because we have a Facebook group, and inevitably I can tell a story that's my story and my narrative, and I'll get 5 or 10 comments that want to change the narrative, just want to change. That's disrespectful. Now that's what disrespect looks like when we're trying to build racial bridges and take out some of the angst we have there. But I see it. People put it, you know, I've just told you a story, this happened. Well, that really wasn't what happened. It was because you were this, or, you know, and it's just so disrespectful. So we do have to have respect at the table in general for each other's individual walks and experiences, because we won't get to a consensus until the maturity level in the room, the emotional intelligence in the room can at least acknowledge that. And I think that's a huge part of what we're missing right now.
Certainly with you there. We've, I think, reached the end of our time. One of the thoughts I remember hearing that still carries to today, I remember someone asking me years ago, do you want to be a thermometer or a thermostat? And I think that's a really good question in the context of us reaching that fork in the road. So are we going to just take in what the culture is putting out there and kind of just reflect that? Or do we want to be thermostats and help set the climate, the temperature, create an atmosphere for safety, for dialogue, for respect, for love for one another? You know, and that's just one of my passions. And I'm trying to apply this even more so with my radio show too, that I don't want to contribute to really giving ammunition to any sides. You know, if anything, I wanted to be clear, I'm coming from the Lord's side, and I want to communicate the love for him, love for one another, and help facilitate that. And I think that's the heart of everybody in this room right now and beyond. So we do that together in his name, right?
Yep.
Right.
It's been absolutely awesome. I enjoyed. Thanks very much, Bob and Arnita and Wayne, for the wonderful book. I continue to recommend this on the air, in fact, encourage people to read it. Thank you for your contribution. It's awesome to meet new friends, Joshua, Nick, and Vanessa, Leah, Nancy, David. God bless you all. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Vince. Well done.
Thank you, Vince.
Thank you so much.
Everybody.
Okay, we're done recording. So
We're done recording.
we got the hour.
Now we can say what we really want to say.
Now, how do you really feel?
That's how you really feel, y'all. What you really want to say.
Now we can let the anchor out.
Keep recording, Bob. This is
Well.
where the good stuff comes in.
This is the good stuff right
Part
here.
two.
Awesome.
That's hilarious.
Good.
That is
Good
hilarious.
job, Vince. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity.
I love
You act like you've done this before.
A few times.
Maybe once or
Right.
twice. No, I really appreciate the heart of everybody in this room. This has been
That's neat.
very good. I've enjoyed it.
Nancy, you brought up White Fragility. Sarah and I were reading it on the way home from our trip. I was reading it to Sarah. I'm a triple dog dare every white person I know to read the first chapter of White Fragility and survive it. What a fabulous, fabulous look at things that I learned so much in the first chapter, just the way I think about things and look at things. It's a very challenging read, and Sarah and I are going to keep working our way through it. So
I'm definitely getting some interesting feedback because most
You
of
sure
my
are, man. I see some of your feedback. I bless you. You're gonna have to need me to come in and help in a minute.
well, I have a couple. Jason popped in a couple of times. A couple other folks have popped
We
in.
need to get Jason on one of these calls too.
Yes, we need Jason on one of these calls. Get him in here. It's been really this little book club that I have on Facebook. There's about 70 of us, and 66 of us are white. And so really trying to, they're pushing through some. I got a message from somebody, what do you mean unconscious bias? I mean, I've been doing that actually out on Facebook, but I'm also getting Facebook messages from, what do you mean unconscious bias? I don't have any unconscious bias. Maybe you don't. I'm not prescribing it. I'm just asking you to think about it.
You're so sweet.
I learned from you.
That's that teacher, and you ought to say, yeah, you got some. Go read up on it. Let's talk later. That's what you
Well, and I have that. But, sometimes I have to think of these adults as being not much different than my 12-year-olds. So, and be that patient and be that kind and be that, pull them along. But
You're
yeah,
a
it's
teacher.
definitely causing some conversation.
Well, if you guys are in the Language of Healing group, you see fragility every day. I see it almost every post. I see fragility. It's really interesting to watch, how uncomfortable people become with one person's position, so much that they just need you. They try to shift off and help you see it their way because they're uncomfortable. Wayne and I one time talked about cognitive dissonance. It's at its best in our group right now.
By the way, although the recording is over, that's going to eventually go on YouTube and Facebook, we're still live on YouTube.
oh, great.
So
that's
FYI,
great.
you bunch of people,
Awesome.
we are live on YouTube, which
Oh,
means
that's
we're live
great.
on a couple of Facebook pages too. Sorry.
So it's also being recorded then, because YouTube is still recording.
Well, I ain't recording it.
Okay. Well, I
That
meant
ain't
what
me.
I said, YouTube. I meant everything I said. Just
I
to
didn't
know
think of that.
I
Buy the
meant
book.
all of it.
Buy this book.
That's awesome.
By this book.
Shameless plug. Here it is.
Yeah, come on.
To buy your copy of The Language of Healing,
Oh,
please send your money order to.
the Vince Coakley.
Ooh.
We just heard from the Department of Corrections in Minneapolis about this book and us possibly doing a training up there. So I'm going, oh my gosh.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
I'm gonna go with you after you read White Fragility, though.
Yeah, I'll be done next week.
I'll let you read that first, then we'll go.
Okay.
Wow.
Well, he
That's
did say every white person should read it and survive it. So,
Yes.
well, that'd be cool, Minneapolis. I mean, that's ground zero right now.
Yeah.
That'd be something. All right, guys. God bless us all.
Thank you guys.
Appreciate
for
all of you.
having me.
getting-
Thank you guys.
We're gonna end this thing right now.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye,
Thanks,
y'all.
Paul. Thank you all for
Bye,
coming.
thanks.
See ya.
David Go, thank you. It was really special for you to be in here. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Learned a lot today. Thank you.
Let it be. See you
Bye
guys.
now.